Hello, I'm Mystical. This is Mystical Gaming. We're back into Watcher of Realms, and over the next couple of days I wanted to do gear raids 1, 2 and 3, stages 18. Now the reason for that is primarily because of the gear dungeon, or gear raid 4. I expect it to be coming to global server soon. I mean, the Forerunner already has a new patch coming out, so they should be happy with the old stuff. Now the requirement for gear raid 4 was you had to have completed gear raids 1, 2 and 3, stages 18. Once you've done that, that was your requirement to go on to the new content. So I just wanted to go over, give you my thoughts on what you should be looking for when you're looking for champions and gear and how to place them, that sort of thing. And we'll do one a day, so over the next couple of days we'll get through them all. So essentially we're starting with gear raid 1, stages 18. Let's get into it. So why is stage 18 important? It's because this is a place where we no longer get legendary gear. So all your gear is going to be mythical from here on in, and you won't get any of that legendary stuff that you'll just want to ditch anyway because you're on the hunt for mythical stuff. So that's why it's important. Now, the other thing that's important here is when we get onto the home screen, one of the things we want to have a look at is the guides button. Now if we give this a press, it will take us into various options, and one of the options is the recommended heroes. Now, if you've got some of the legendaries, that's going to make your job or your life much easier. But also underneath the recommended is the recommended heroes. Now, one of these on this level is Greed. Now, he is free for everyone at 30 days. So if you've passed the 30-day mark and you've got Greed, brilliant. If you haven't, there'll be other champions that you can go for. You might already have some of the legendaries as well going for that. Next thing along is the recommended lineups. Now you can have a look here at what other people have done. See if you have the same champions as they've got, or what they've done with their champions and how they've used them. You can break this down. You can look into how many healers they've got. Did they take magic, or did they take marksman? That sort of thing. Now you'll see in some of these, people have taken certain heroes quite a lot. Now this one here, Greed, has done most of the damage. So he's used the epic. That is free for everyone, and he's got most of the damage out of that epic. As you come down, there's plenty of people coming down that have used legendaries and Vieira and that sort of thing, but not everyone has. And it's important to note that you can just look up, see what people have done, and you can see how much damage each of these champions has done to see how much importance they were for that run for them. Now the other thing we may want to look at is map info. Now this will give us a breakdown of A, what the map looks like, and B, the champions in it. Now at stages 18 the champions don't do a great deal, so it's not that bad. But here we can have a look to see if they suffer from magic or defense worse. So magic resistance and defense are mostly the same on all these champions. So it doesn't really matter which ones you bring. On some levels and on some stages, it's quite important to have a look at this and see which champions you need to bring in, because you can save yourself a lot of work. But here, as we can see, defense, magic resistance, pretty much the same across all the champions as we go down. Now the last tab to look at is popular heroes, but unfortunately it's just a list of legendaries, and we want to sort of avoid that at the moment. If you've got the legendaries, brilliant, but if you haven't, let's have a look at some of the epics you can use, because they're easier for you to awaken. Okay, so here we are, stage 18, gear raid 1. Let's start building up our team. Now one of the things we're going to look for is AoE damage. Now mostly mages do that. Now we can see Greed is there, and he's got a big thumbs up button beside him as well if we're a little bit blind and don't want to choose him. So he goes in. We always also notice that he was picked quite often in the recommended lineups as well. Now next are any other mages that we feel that have done AoE damage. There's another one there, so we'll select him and put him on our team as well. Now any other AoE damage dealers? There's Maul, Marksman, very good AoE damage dealer and very popular. Also popular in Gear Raid 3 as well. So if you're picking him up and leveling someone, feel free to use him, because he's also available for Gear Raid 3 as well. Now Dolores isn't so much a healer, she is used mainly for a buff. Now we can buff our champions to make sure we do more damage, and someone who popularly goes along with Dolores is Autumn at early stages. So we're selecting Autumn and we'll chuck her into our team as well, and they are there just to buff our DPS, because all we need to do It's DPS the mobs down before they get past the wall. That's essentially the job of our DPS here, and that is essentially all you have to do in Gear Aid 1. Now, the other thing you can do is you can put fighters the other side of the wall. So as enemies come up to the wall, then the fighters can attack them. So we'll put a couple of fighters in just to show we can show where we place them. Now, another important consideration to do is when you're building your team is to remember that you're only going to place down 8 out of the 10 slots. That leaves you 2 slots completely free that aren't doing anything. Now, these 2 slots become quite important, probably more so at a relatively younger or beginner's game account. Now, what you want to do is have a look at the factions that you've got available to you, or the factions of the heroes that you've chosen, and then have a look for a lord for that faction. So here is Wrath. He's gone in there because he's part of the Nightmare Council. Now, he gives us a buff. Just because he's a lord, just because he's in our team, he increases faction allies' basic attributes by 5%. Then every time we place another ally down who's from that faction, we get 5, 10, 20, up to 35% attack speed. And bear in mind, it also does reduce our healing by 20%, but do remember that he's giving you this lord skill, and it is just a spare slot. Now, quite often you'll see teams that are made up, and they just put a lord in there to boost the allies' attributes. There we go, that's the word I was looking for. Now, we've also got another spare slot on the other level, so let's see if we can have a look at what other people we've got in the same faction. So once we've had a look, we don't even have to need to know if we've got a lord there. We can just search on that faction. Let's have a look and see if we've got anyone. There's Pyros, we can put him in. There we go, we've got a lord for the faction and we're getting a lord bonus. There we are, lord skills for Infernal Blast. He increases faction allies' basic attributes by 10%. So we've already gained 10% on all our stats before we've even got in there. And there's another one, if we use him and he uses his ability, he gives us another skill. So we can boost that slot as well. Let's have a look at the other one. There's a North. Let's have a look to see if we've got anyone. There's a little rare. So if you get this rare, and she's common enough to get, so when you're pulling shards, don't sell her because she's nice just to put in there because she gives us this lord buff. Faction allies attributes increased by 5%. Periodically grants all faction allies a shield equal to 10% of their max HP for 15 seconds. The more faction allies there are, the more frequently the effect goes off. So we can add her in as well and we can get that buff going. Now, these are just 2 spare slots that you may not even be using, but you can use them to boost the stats of all your other champions that you are going to be using. Now, the only other thing we want to chuck in there is a healer, just to make sure we're good for the fight. Now, if I am using a lord for a particular faction, then I do look to see if there are other faction people that I can put in there. So I've swapped out Scorch for a Northern fighter, and I've put in Vortex as the healer because he's from the north as well, and that gives me a greater frequency on my shield. So that's our team makeup. Let's jump into the fight and see how we go. So here we go, here's our map. Let's start chucking our heroes down. So we want to start out with our DPS and put that in first. So there's Greed, he's going up there and he's going to start DPSing the mobs down before they come to the wall. And there is Maul just up behind him. He's got a slightly longer range, so he goes in behind him. Next we can start buffing these people. So we've got Dolores and we've got Autumn there, and they're just going to buff our 2 DPS. And that is essentially all they're there for. After that, we're going to want to consider whether we want to put fighters down or a healer down, just to make sure we don't die. Now, the only people really taking damage are the people on that first row closest to the wall. Everyone else on the row back won't be taking damage, and that's the same for the other side as well. Now, as our counter builds up, we can start to actually put in even more DPS for us, or DPS range DPS, sorry, or we can start putting our fighters down next to the wall. Now, the fighters are only going to hit people when they come close to the wall. There are fighters who've got a longer range, so do keep a lookout for them. I think one of them's a Lord as well, but that is why you saw in a lot of the teams that Valkyria was being used, because she's got this nice long AoE range. Now, we just want to keep a look at how our wall is doing and the number of mobs we've got killed. So our wall is down by maybe 20%, and we've already got 40 out of 73 of the mobs killed. So we are right now sitting in a very good place, and we can see that the boss is almost down to 50% as well as the last 20-ish mobs come along. Now, all you want to do is just keep this sustained damage up and make sure your damage is going faster than the mobs can get through the wall, and that is essentially it. Now, you may have to gear up people and you may have to level them up, but not everyone needs gear and not everyone needs to be leveled up. Your DPS, which is the important part of this, because it is a DPS race essentially, that will need gear on, and the higher up you level that gear, the better your odds of getting through this are. There we go, Greed and Maul done nearly all the damage. Everyone else was sort of surplus to requirement, to be brutally honest, but they're in there to make up, not just make up the numbers, but to show you an idea of what you can do and how you can buff your DPS so your DPS does more damage for you. So once you've done it and completed it to 3-star level, then you can turn on the power of dominance, or it will come on for you. So here we are, we can see the power of dominance will be unlocked and will be granted a buff to all heroes, and that is all stats 30%, which is a really good buff, and you can get that as soon as you 3-start it. So once you put your best gear on your DPS or whatever you're using to get past it, you don't necessarily need that gear on them again. I mean, I wouldn't strip all gear off them and try and run it naked, that won't work, but essentially you can get lesser gear on them once you've cleared it. So get it cleared once, get the power of dominance up, and that will make subsequent fights much easier for you. Now here are the champions and their gear. Now their gear is somewhat better than it needs to be, but the essential part of this is the idea that you take away of what you need and how you can progress this. So when I look at my gear on the gear I want to level up, when I got to this sort of place, I was thinking, well, I need my DPS to have attack percentage, because that would be a nice thing to have, and I would like them to crit. So I don't like running with a crit rate bangle, I think it is, a main stat. I don't like it. So I do look for crit rate on everything else that I've got. So some pieces have got good rolls and some pieces have got not so great rolls. But as long as I try and hit that crit rate issue, then I'm fine. So look at this piece, crit rate rolled really well, everything else is terrible, but I'm only after the crit rate, and for me it's then worth taking up to 16 because it supplies him with enough attack bonus then to actually be able to be useful when I'm trying to clear this stuff. And he's already geared up to clear stage, I don't know, 319 as well. So as long as he's critting, that's fine. Now he's over crit cap, which is a wasted stat in this game. I don't get it buffed onto anything else, so that's a bit of a blow, and he's got almost no crit damage, but he's doing enough damage to clear 319, so he's well in excess of what's required for 180. Okay, now greed is much the same. It's again looking for attack percentage on the main stat and crit rate. Once I have those two stats, stuff becomes worth me leveling up. I haven't leveled this one up because I'd only get defense out of it, and he's done enough. Those two both rolled well at the start, so I pushed all the way through. The rest didn't roll so well, but there you go. You can't have it all ways. But as long as you push up the crit rate, so he's got 82% crit rate, it's not ideal. I would like the other 18%, but he doesn't need it. It doesn't need it for what I'm doing in the game anyway. And he certainly won't need it if you're just at your first stage of trying to push for gear rate 118, okay? So here's Dolores. You can watch a million videos on her, but essentially she is not there to heal, she is there to use her buff, Invigoration, which supplies a proportional amount, I think it's 40%, of her attack onto your attackers. So the higher her attack, the more attack she gives to your DPS, and that is all she's there for. Here's Autumn. She can get put in just to give out a buff, and I think the buff she gives is crit rate and crit damage. So if you are a little bit short on your crit rate, it's not an issue because she gives out this crit rate, crit damage buff. Crit damage 40%, so or 60%, sorry. So she's helping again your DPS to push your team, and she's not leveled up, and her gear is absolutely useless. So here's our fighter. Now he did almost no damage, but he is in there just to show where you would put him. Now, if you get him leveled up, then he does this AoE attack. I haven't, but he's just in there to show where you can place fighters and that you can use them as some form of DPS going forward. So you might have Valkyria or something like that with a big long range and AoE, chuck her in, she'll do wonders for you. Here's Scorch. He does an AoE attack and he's got a bit of a range on it. although I don't know anyone who's leveled him up or anyone who's used him, because he just appears to be terrible everywhere. But essentially he could be used because he does these 2 squares, so he'd do one at the wall and the one past it. Those 2 areas where they're coming in, he could be fantastic. I wouldn't level him up to find out, maybe one day we will. So when you're looking around for which champions to use, you want AoE damage, and the way to tell is in the description it says AoE damage. So a quick note on where to get gear from: you can get it from the storyline. This I got from the storyline, and my first legendary is still wearing it because I know it's going to roll up well. Good stats, good rolls, absolutely brilliant, all came from the storyline, and you can get it from there as well. So it's good stuff to roll up and max out realistically, because you know you're going to get nice big rolls on it. Okay, so some of your gear should be coming from the storyline. So the things you want to look out for is AoE champions. Make sure in their skills it says AoE damage on there. You want gear that's got attack percentage and crit rate. You want to get that crit rate up so you're critting all the time. And then you want to make sure if you're leveling gear, hopefully there'd be a Smith's event on so you can do it at the same time as that. Look at other teams. Recommended and popular heroes, they can give you a good insight. You might have someone sitting down that you haven't used. And also make sure you get this smashed out before Gear Raid 4 drops, so you too can do the new content. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll see you all in a video again soon. Cheers then, bye.